Recently, the gamer had an article where they interviewed the Final Fantasy VII Remake co-director, who was saying that Last of Us Part 2 is a benchmark for video game diversity, but the game journalists themselves were misrepresenting the quote as well as pushing their own ideology. I don't think anyone's surprised. Hey, what is going on, everybody? How are you all doing today? I hope you all are having a wonderful and fantastic day today, and if not, hopefully you all will have a better tomorrow. So just a couple of days ago, this article came out. Final Fantasy VII Remake developer says The Last of Us Part 2 is a benchmark for video game diversity. You know, because the one thing the game journalists are always about is their politics. You know, it's not about video games to them. It's not what they care about. It's about pushing their ideologies onto you, preaching to you how you should live, rather than allowing you to have fun with your entertainment. They try to push real-world issues into escapism, trying to ruin escapism. That's what it is. You know, and we're going to go over a couple of articles because one thing that, when I was looking into this, one thing that I did notice with these articles is that the game journalists, in quotations obviously, what they were doing was they were actually misrepresenting the Final Fantasy VII co-director's quotes and tried to push their own take onto it, their own ideology, because nowadays it's not about actual journalism, it's basically just a bunch of activism. That's what it really is nowadays. Which, you know, that's why nobody trusts game journalists. They're not really game journalists. What they actually are just nothing more than activists and propaganda machines. Speaking with the gamer, Final Fantasy VII Remake co-director Motomu Toriyama has expanded upon the LGBTQ+ nature of the JRPG remake, as well as highlighting how Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2 set a benchmark for diversity in the gaming medium. We always see this. It's always them praising, just championing in The Last of Us Part 2. The game was a complete and total disaster. If there's anything to take away from The Last of Us Part 2, it's this: don't be like The Last of Us Part 2. Because that game is a mess. Now, they talk about how we need more diversity and inclusion. Now, see, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with diversity as long as you don't force it. Now, when you force it, that's when it becomes an issue. What you also see is where they continue to praise The Last of Us Part 2, you know, by talking about how, while it was a rather harrowing experience, The Last of Us Part 2 broke a number of boundaries with lesbian heroine, bisexual romance, and transgender characters, all featuring prominent throughout the unfolding narrative. In that game, Ellie was basically just a homicidal maniac going, I'm a lesbian! Like, that was it. That's her character. And that's all they basically made Ellie's character about. That was really it. They ruined the characters in that game. I mean, that's exactly what they did. They ruined the good characters people liked in the first game. As well as, you know, the franchise, because, you know, they had to make the game for Twitter, of course. But now, I want you to pay close attention to what the co-director of Final Fantasy VII Remake states here. So, this is what he stated. The Last of Us Part 2 really delivered on its consideration for diversity, Toriyama-san tells us, right down to the UI, which is user interface, and I would imagine that the cost of debugging on the game was massive. However, having achieved that makes it a great game that sets a benchmark for the industry. So what he's talking about here in terms of diversity, he means the user interface. But leave it to this author of this article to not understand that and to try to push their politics into what he's saying. So they're misrepresenting him to shove in what they want it to mean. Not what he actually means, but what they want it to actually mean. And this is what game journalists do all the time.
But wait! There's more!
To further show the misrepresentation of what the gamer did with the quote here, the gamer misrepresents quote from Final Fantasy VII Remake co-director Motomu Toriyama to push diversity at The Last of Us Part 2. While Toriyama certainly does acknowledge that The Last of Us Part 2 delivered its consideration for diversity, it appears that King's framing that he had heralded said diversity as a benchmark for the industry, omits the sentence immediately preceding this awe-inspiring descriptor, in which the co-director explicitly expresses his admiration for Naughty Dog's work developing the game's user interface and the massive amount of money he imagined it cost them to debug the same work. In other words, what the gamer throws out is that he's talking about the cost of debugging the user interface to make it work properly. That's what he's going on about. But these political clowns, all that they see is Last of Us Part 2 praise, praise, praise. You know, that's what it is to them. It's not actually about how the game functions. To them, it's about their politics. Now, when you go and look at the writer of the article's Twitter, now, I just want to say, do not contact this person, do not message them, leave them alone, okay? Just want to say. You know, Jade King, apparently they have the trans logo, apparently talking about, you know, their preferences, you know, basically all these pronouns. Don't care about any of that. It's the typical Twitter stuff that they have, basically. You know, don't care about any of that stuff. But it's what they say here. You know, this is the big thing. Jade King states, my self-worth has been in the bin almost constantly lately, but I've put out some killer interviews this week, both of which delve into mediums I'm passionate about and light a fire under me to tell stories like that of my own one day. And see, right here, this tells you right now, this is the state of modern game journalism. This is the state of it, because you have these hack activists that don't see themselves having self-worth. You know, the only medium that they're into is politics because that's the only medium they stay in. So rather than trying to jump into other things that could be fun or entertaining, they stick to one medium. In other words, they're going to tell one type of story, which is the political story that they want to tell, because that's the only one they know, because that's the only one they care about, because they're actually saturated in politics. That's all that they are just consumed by. They just look at it, they're like, oh yes, politics, because that's what's important. You know, not trying to escape the problems of the real world, just focusing on politics. That's all they do. Now, continuing to look at this Bounding into Comics article, though, taking into consideration the full context of his statements, it appears that rather than praising the game's diversity, Toriyama was actually offering his respect to the game's impressively extensive list of accessibility options and all the work it took to make them function properly in an exhaustive number of various combinations. This more likely explanation is also supported by the published version of King's interview with Toriyama Final Fantasy series producer Yoshinori Kitase and co-director Naoki Hamaguchi, wherein the gamer wrote of the very same quote, the team points to Naughty Dog's The Last of Us 2 as a benchmark for diversity in the medium right now, both in terms of queer storytelling and how its accessibility, if it is added, shines above almost everything else out there. Exactly. See, these game journalists don't care about video games. That's not what it's about to them. You know, it's not about the wonderful characters that are in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's not about the good story that it's trying to tell. It's not about the good gameplay. You know, the stuff that people actually care about. You know, instead, what it's actually about is just these game journalists having their heads up their asses, you know, wanting it to be about their sensibilities and how they want these companies to pander to them, bend the knee to them, and how they're just nothing but closed-minded bigots. And taking a look at this other article here. Yoshinori Kitase hopes players can come to terms with real-world issues through Final Fantasy VII Remake. Yet again, politics, sensibilities, that's what it's about to them. You know, they start this off with a gatekeeping statement stating, Final Fantasy VII has always been a political story, regardless of what gamers on the internet would like to tell you. That statement in itself right there is a gatekeeping statement. What they're doing here is they are basically like, this is a fact. You know, I'm stating a fact right here. You know, I don't care. You can't, you know, prove me wrong. This is a fact. You know, this is their mindset. You know, they're not open-minded to things. They're closed-minded bigots. This is who they are. This is what they do. And so the article does continue by saying, Cloud, Barrett, Aerith, Tifa, and company strive to fight against this image to represent those in the real world who wish to rebel against those who want to doom our planet to ruin we recently had a chance to catch up with Final Fantasy VII Remake producer Yoshinori Kitase to talk about the political themes of this universe and whether they have a bearing on reality. And here's the thing. You have themes when you're creating a story, and you can look at certain events within the world, within history. But the thing is, you can look at generalized politics. Now, what you can do with that is you can take that, like big business, like for example, like the little guy versus big corporations, things of that sort. You can create your own thing out of that, right? When you look at it, Shinra, Midgar, for example, what they were doing was they were taking the life of Gaia, and which that caused a big problem because they were basically destroying the planet. And then this leads into Avalanche coming in to try to stop them. This leads into the idea of Sephiroth as well and his plan. You see, it's about the themes. You can take these themes and use them and play with them, create what you want out of them. It's about creating your own thing, right? But what these people want instead is they want it to be political. They want it to be real world politics. They want it to be what's going on in the current day. That's what these clowns want. They don't want it to be fun. They don't want it to be fictional. They don't want it to be entertaining. They want it to be boring. They want it to be their political perspective. That's what they want. They don't want it to be an actual story of escapism. They want it to be boring. We created a story based in a fantasy world with fantastical concepts like Shinra and Mako, etc., but these are deliberately made abstract enough that they can be superimposed and compared to things in the real world. Kitase-san explains, the environment and the way people think has changed a lot between 1997 and 2021, but the idea of the life of the planet can be seen as a timeless issue. Regardless of the era we find ourselves in, I hope that each player can face and come to terms with issues facing them through the story of Final Fantasy VII. See, it's meant to be entertaining. It's this fictional world with these fictional issues. Things that they played around with and then they created of their own. It's not real world stuff, it's fictional stuff that people can all look at and enjoy. Yeah, which, people can enjoy escapism. Yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to be a fictional story. That's what they're trying to tell here. A fun, entertaining story that anybody could get into and that anybody could enjoy. And that's what people want. They want a fun game that, entices them into it, right? That throws them into that world that they get attached to, as well as the characters. There are strong moments that you can see here, like Cloud, for example, when he learns of everything, it breaks him. He goes through a just complete mental storm of what happened with that. It's a story of love and loss. It's a war, but it's entertaining. It throws you into its world and you get invested into it. That's what makes a game so special. And that's what they're trying to say here is that they're trying to tell you a story that you can enjoy. Yeah, there was the problem of what they did to Tifa's breast, which I still don't like, and that's something that they never should have done, in my opinion. But they're still trying to tell you a good story. That's the thing. And when you look at these game journalists, you look at these people on Twitter, well, what are they doing? It's not about the story to them. It's about, like I said, their ideology and their politics, which nobody wants to hear. People are just absolutely tired of it. And that's why when you look at this interview, what you're seeing is not what was actually meant to be said by the co-director, but misinterpreted and twisted by these clowns that want to make everything politicized. That's what they're doing. They're not making it about the game. They're not making it about the story, the characters, playability. They're not making it about any of that. And this is what they do. They try to twist things to fit their narrative. This is why people are more invested in Japanese media, like, for example, anime, manga, and even their video games, because they're doing so much better than Western companies are, like, comics, for example, American comics like DC and Marvel, they're just falling apart, because they insert stuff like this, which is why Western entertainment is falling apart, because they keep trying to pull shit like this, as to where, when you look at what Japanese entertainment does, it tries to pique your interest, it tries to give you excellent stories, with great messages, that, make sure that you come back for more, which is what they should be doing. They keep trying to give you entertaining media, entertaining movies, games, shows, which is good. And that's what it should be, not this political garbage you see all the time by game journalists. But anyways, let me know what you think about this entire situation down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and make sure you were still subscribed because YouTube is unsubscribing people from all their favorite channels. So make sure you were still subscribed to all your favorite channels. Hit the video with a like, and also be sure to share the video on social media. Spread the word and get it out there. It's greatly appreciated, and it really helps out the channel a lot. Also, be sure to follow me on Discord and Minds. We have a wonderful community there. Not only that, but it will keep you up to date on when the news videos will be released, as well as any other upcoming events in the near future. So be sure to follow me on both Discord and Minds. The links are in the description down below. But anyways, I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful and fantastic day today. And remember, if today was not a good day, tomorrow could always be better. Take care of yourselves and everyone around you. And have yourselves a good one out there, everybody.